Hello, one and all. I am Jeb, and I am back with a new episode of The Angry Author. It has been a while. 2 weeks back, my son was out on spring break. Last week, took a trip to the beautiful Outer Banks for a sort of a mini family reunion. So finally had the chance to get back, get some writing done, and lay down some more ramblings for everybody to take a listen to and hopefully get some amount of entertainment out of, even if it's just at how much I ramble exactly. Anyway, through the first few episodes, and big thank you to everybody that's listened to those and given me any feedback on that. It is much appreciated. I have had a few people ask me about getting the podcast available through Apple Podcast, which is something I am working on. Big thing with Apple is when you submit, they test everything to make sure everything seems legit, stuff like that. And the first episode was really short, something in the neighborhood of like 20 minutes. So Apple pretty much they read that as being test material. They don't like to approve that stuff. So the plan at some point this week is going to be pretty much to combine the first 3 episodes and get that submitted. So if you see it pop up on the Apple Podcast Store anytime in the next couple of weeks, just be aware that the first episode is probably technically going to be comprised of the first 3 that you would find on YouTube or SoundCloud. So just wanted to throw that out there for everybody, so that everybody is aware of that. Starting off, I something that's been that of course I've been paying huge attention to, and it's a subject that I tackled in my second podcast. Is the Stanley Cup playoffs. I'm a big Carolina Hurricanes fan. I have been since the team moved here in '97. And anybody that follows the NHL knows that the Hurricanes had gone a decade. 2009 was the last time they were in the playoffs. And you talk about a team that's feast or famine. They, you look at their last 3 trips to the playoffs. In 2002, they got to the Cup Finals and lost to Detroit. 2006, they won the Cup. 2009, which was the last year they were in the playoffs, they made it to the conference final. So if they get in, they have a pretty good track record of doing a pretty fair amount of damage. In that previous podcast, I discussed their first round matchup with the Capitals, the things that they would have to do, and they did it. With a few exceptions, I felt like the Hurricanes really were able to kind of neutralize Washington's attack, which was key because the big advantage that the Capitals had was their offensive firepower, their depth up front. There was a 6-0 loss for the Hurricanes in there, so that's not to say that every game went according to plan, but we were actually at the Outer Banks for Game 7. And I'll be honest, early in the game, it was looking tough. By the time it hit overtime, I was down in our bedroom. I was using my cell phone to stream the game. And once overtime started, there was this feeling, and people that follow the Hurricanes and have for some amount of time, will know what I'm getting at. There's just something about the way the team's been playing. I just did not think that they were going to lose that game. Of course, in the playoffs, Game 7 overtime, all it takes is one bad bounce, and it could have gone the other way. But there was just a feeling that they were going to pull that one out, and they did. Then got a whopping 2 days off, just pretty much a break like you get in between games of a series. To start facing the New York Islanders, who have had a remarkable season. The fact that Lou Lamoriello came in as a GM, they brought in Barry Trotz, who was fresh off winning the Stanley Cup with the Capitals last season. People gave them credit for those moves, and they should, because those are great moves for the team to have made. But losing Tavares to Toronto as a free agent threw a lot of doubt on the team and how they would perform. But Robin Leonard has been great for them all season. Was a big part of them eliminating Pittsburgh in the first round in the sweep. So nothing to be taken lightly. And in the first two games, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of chippiness. The puck was bouncing around a lot. Game one went into overtime, tied at 0. Hurricanes were able to pull out an overtime winner there. Game two, all it took was 48 seconds. They went to the third period, trailing 1-0. They scored 2 goals in 48 seconds, and that was it. They the Hurricanes didn't play particularly poorly in game two, but they definitely didn't. They didn't maintain that same level of play throughout the game, which is unfortunate. But at the end of the day, the wins are what counts. So we've got Game 3 tomorrow at PNC in Raleigh. So that's going to be an absolute madhouse. People are going to be going nuts. It's going to be crazy. So definitely looking forward to that. Of course, before I end this little section, you can't talk about the Hurricanes in the playoffs this year without talking about injuries. Through the course of the first round, Svechnikov went out, Ferland went out, Martinick had an injury that had been re-aggravated. In this series now we've had Trevor Van Riemsdyk got knocked out very early in game 2, and he looks to be, from what I've seen so far, looks to be done for the postseason, which sucks because he's been a very underrated part of the defense. He's done a very, very solid job on the third pairing. He's done what's needed. He hasn't made a lot of mistakes. At any time that you have a third pairing defenseman, if you can go a couple of games and not really hear their name a lot, chances are they're doing their job. He's not out there coughing the puck up, making all sorts of errors. So that's a hit. Thankfully, of course, with the Hurricanes, the defense is a very deep area. They've got a very deep pool of talent to draw from with that. So that's a plus. The negative, you never want to see somebody get hurt, especially this time of year. But it was early in the game, so the Hurricanes played the vast majority of that game with 5 defensemen. You also had Saku Manalainen got hurt. He seems to be done for the postseason. Manalainen's a guy that, has not been putting up big offensive numbers, but he's been doing what he's been tasked to do. He's been throwing his weight around. You could see how irritating he was to Washington's defenders getting in front of the net, especially after whistles. There was a lot of scrapping going on that he was around. And the biggest note from game 2 was Peter Mrazek going out with an injury. So that's, for the Hurricanes fans that have followed this team this year, there was, you don't ever want to see somebody get hurt, especially Mrazek. He's played incredibly well for this team. He's an emotional guy. He's always excited when they win. And you could see, he tweaked something there, listing his lower body. The speculation could be a groin. It could, we don't know. This time of year, you're not going to find that stuff out. Not until after the playoffs. You're not really gonna know any of that stuff. But you could see when he left the game, he was pissed. He was not a happy guy. But again, for those that have been following the Canes this season, they knew that we had a backup in McElhinney that could come in, play composed, play calm, and I believe in the close to 2 periods, not quite 2 periods that he played in, he faced 17 shots and stopped everything. He did get beat for a few posts, but posts don't even count as shots. So, obviously he did his job. If they got past him and went in the net, that's one thing. They got past him and hit the post. I don't really care. I look at the results at the end of the game. Mac did what he needed to do, and he's such a calm guy. His third career, this is a guy that's been in the league for over a decade, has been around, played for different teams. Only his third career playoff game, comes in a series at a point where, yes, the Hurricanes won the first game, but it was a squeaker in overtime. Coming into another tight game, Cole not had any playing time. He hasn't played at all during the playoffs. Mrazek, got a pretty fair share of the workload going down the stretch when the Hurricanes were really working to secure that playoff spot. And McElhinney just came in and did what he does. He did what he's done for this team for the majority of the season, which is to come in, to be calm, to stop pucks. And you can't overemphasize that enough. This time of year, with such a young team, in a tight series, you've got players dropping left and right. Your starting goalies, had to leave the game with an injury. To have a guy come in that's not only stopping pucks, but is just deadpan calm, has got to help the team out. Now, of course, this team does have other veteran leadership. You don't have to look any further than the captain, Justin Williams, Mr. Game 7, winner of 3 Stanley Cups, the first of which, of course, was with the Hurricanes in 2006. And then I'm going to jump straight to this guy because he has been a beast. The Canes fans listening are already going to know the name that's about to come out of my mouth. But it's number 11, Jordan Staal. Ridiculous. He has been a horse. Down the stretch, his play picked up noticeably. In the playoffs so far, the biggest ding on him, and I'd have to look at I don't have the numbers pulled up here to look at. I think maybe his face-off game has not been quite where we're all accustomed to seeing it, but he has been strong defensively, laying clean hits, not huge open ice hits, but laying decisive hits to separate players from the puck. And when he gets in the other team's zone and along the boards, below the goal line, if he's got the puck, good luck trying to take it away from him. We've got a Chihuahua, and I can try and take a tennis ball from him, and that little bastard puts up a vicious fight. You make him, 200 plus pounds and over 6 feet tall, that's Jordan Staal. Tenacious. You are not going to get the puck away from him unless he wants you to have it. And it's been phenomenal. And this team, like I said, there just seems to be this aura around the team. Now, I'm not saying that I think that they're going to win the next 2 to close out this series. I'm not saying, what I think they will or will not do from this point forward in the playoffs. But again, those of us that have watched this team for, a considerable amount of time know what I'm saying when I'm saying that there's a feeling about the way things are progressing with them. There's not, there's no denying it. You look at the injury problems and everything else that's happened. They just man up. They keep, and I'm sorry to use that phrase. I'm not a huge fan of that phrase, but it's always next man up. They'll have somebody new come into the lineup. Maybe it's somebody that played some of the regular season. Maybe somebody that hasn't. But the team shows up and they work. And in the playoffs, that grit, that determination, that work is always going to beat skill. You cannot rely solely on skill in the Stanley Cup playoffs. If you do, you're probably not going to have a very long run unless your entire team is loaded with skill from top to bottom with few to no gaps. So it's just been, it's been something else to see. Speaking on the skill part, we've seen Teravainen and Niederreiter pick it up here recently because they've been a little quiet so far in the playoffs, much more than we would have expected up to this point. And there's been Sebastian Aho, who was unquestionably the best offensive player on this team through the season. A guy that's still incredibly young and is only going to get better. But he has struggled considerably this playoff year. You know, his first experience with NHL playoffs, and the consensus seems to be that he's battling some kind of a nagging injury, something like that. So I'm not here. I'm not going to trash him, especially after what he did for the team during the season. He's out there playing. He's trying to do everything that he can, and he's not been a liability. So hopefully he works past whatever it is that's bothering him. Because the further this team goes along, the more that they're going to need his offensive contributions. But that's my piece on that. I just wanted to follow up on that since that's something that had come up on an earlier episode of the podcast. Now, moving to the next topic is to deal with music. I'm a guy that is a big fan of. I grew up listening to rock, classic rock, hard rock, heavy metal. I listen to a little bit of everything, especially the older I get. I've kind of branched out a little bit more. But there's just something about metal and its all of its multitude of subgenres that has kept it as my go-to for so long. So I just happened to be browsing online a little while ago, and I saw an article from Loudwire that said that heavy metal was the fastest growing music genre in 2018. Now, I know anybody out there that just, listens to mainstream radio, things like that, you're probably shaking your head and saying, that's a lie. You're a fucking liar. That is not true. And I agree. I definitely see that point of view. That's why I don't really listen to the radio. But I would agree with that statement. I will preface by saying that this article focuses on findings linked to statistics from TuneCore. TuneCore is an independent digital music distribution, publishing, and licensing service. But basically, their CEO had issued a statement based on what they saw on their service. He released the top 6 most popular genres that they have featured through TuneCore. Number 1 was, I'm sorry, wait, and this is going off of a percentage growth from the previous year. Just want to throw that in there. So I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So number 6 is instrumental, which saw a 42% year-over-year increase. World music saw a 57% increase year-over-year. K-pop saw a 58% increase. R&B/soul saw a 68% increase. Then you get up to J-pop, which jumped 133% over the previous year. Top of the list, heavy metal, 154% increase. Now, since we've established that, this is based off statistics from this service, TuneCore, that I'm not familiar with. Maybe some of you out there are. Drop me a comment, shoot me an email, let me know, if you use them, if you've got experience, if you're just a listener that uses their service. But I don't know specifically what they classify as heavy metal. I mean, are they throwing Nickelback in there? Or are we talking about stuff like thrash metal, death metal, stuff like that? Power metal? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what they're basing it off of. Internally, how their classifications work, because I don't see anything that specifically calls out rock or anything like that. So I also don't see a standard pop category other than J-pop and K-pop. I don't see any kind of an American pop category. So maybe stuff from that's getting lumped in there. Maybe it's something strange. I don't know. But apparently, TuneCore is seeing a lot of growth. They've seen 146% usage growth in Africa over the last year, 52% in Asia, and that runs all the way down to 31% growth for North America. So that's interesting. So if you're out there, if you're, if you're in a band and you're looking to get your music out there, check out TuneCore. It's TUNECORE, just all one word. Uh, it might be something worthwhile for you to check out. If you're an aspiring musician and you're trying to get your music out there to more people. So that's definitely something to look into. Speaking about reaching more people, I had a brief discussion before we had left for our trip. I'm a member. I'm not the most active, but I am a member of the writing community on Twitter, and there are always people that are new to writing in whatever capacity they're trying to do it. All types of age ranges, all types of genres. Looking to get more exposure, to get their stuff out there, to have their work hosted on different sites, available for sale at different places. I will preface this by saying that this is not any kind of a paid endorsement or sponsorship. This is just me speaking from experience. Because naturally, a lot of people go to Amazon. Amazon's the biggest marketplace in the world. They have their line of Kindle e-readers. You can go through, upload a book there. They have software that you can download to actually get things edited and fit down specifically for Kindle publishing. You can turn around and use that to create a paperback. So a lot of people gravitate towards Amazon, and that's that's completely fine. However, there is a company called Draft to Digital, and that's Draft, DRAFT, the number 2, and then digital, that basically works with several platforms, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, Kobo, and even library services and different things like that, where you can upload one copy of the book there, put all your information and everything in, put your pricing details, and then it goes through the process of publishing it to all those various retail outlets. So one of the biggest benefits with using a service like Draft to Digital, which is free to use, of course, they do keep a small percentage from the sales. Actually, you know what? I'm not sure that they actually do. Aside from what comes to you from from the retailers themselves. So I'd have to double check that to be 100% sure. Anyway, getting sidetracked. But with that, you don't have to keep track of going into Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, all these different sites to track your sales, to track anything like that. It's all, you've got one sales dashboard. Everything is right there in one place. So if you are already dealing with these different sites and you haven't tried Draft to Digital, it could be something worthwhile to look into, just to save you from having to bounce around and check multiple outlets. I would definitely recommend it. I will say, if you're big on Amazon, Amazon is a little bit funny sometimes at working with outside distributors. I had actually submitted my horror, Jesus, why can I never say that? My horror anthology to Amazon, originally using Draft to Digital, and it's set for over a week, didn't get anywhere, so I canceled that out and then just went straight through on Amazon by myself. That's the first time I tried to use Amazon with Draft to Digital. Didn't go out too well, but definitely something that's worth keeping in mind. With that, for all the writers out there, definitely take a look at Draft to Digital. Plus, some people strictly look at Amazon and they're like, well, I can earn a high royalty percentage. I can earn for pages read and things like that. And that's true. You can. And like I said, I'm not going to slight Amazon at all. However, if you go through and you configure your keywords and stuff and you're getting a lot of traffic and then they change something in an algorithm and then that drops off, if that's your primary source of income, that can really throw you off. If you've got backups, there are people out there that'll go through the iBook store that use Kobo's and go through the Kobo store. And Kobo's got an agreement in place with Walmart right now. There's actually a specific Walmart page that's got the Kobo ebook stuff up there. So if you have anything published on Kobo, you can find it that way as well. Same thing with Barnes & Noble. They've got the Nook. People use that. They're looking for materials. So it never hurts to branch out and to keep it spread around. Of course, from Amazon's perspective, they have the KDP Select tier, which for those that aren't familiar, you can earn higher royalty incomes, and there are other benefits, promotions, stuff that you can run. However, they request that for the entire time that any of your books are registered in that program, that they are not available for sale in that digital format anywhere else, any other websites, or even your own website. And of course, you can register that individually for each book that you've got. You cannot cancel it on the spot. You can take it off of, because it automatically renews for every period. You can turn that off and then just not opt back into it. But just bear that in mind, because if you do have a book registered in KDP Select and they find it online, say through Barnes & Noble or somewhere else, they can definitely drop that off there and cause you some problems. I can't speak to that directly because it hasn't happened to me. But I have heard horror stories about it happening to other writers out there. So just keep that in mind. The other thing that I wanted to touch on from the writer perspective is with audiobooks. When I was working on my first novel, same thing as trying to get the podcast on iTunes, people would ask me, oh, well, you're going to do an audiobook. And, it had kind of occurred to me, but having never done it, I had absolutely no idea how to go about it. It was actually, oddly enough, it was actually through using Draft to Digital. One of their partners led me to an ad for ACX. And ACX it's owned by Amazon. It works in conjunction with Audible, which is, I'm pretty sure, the biggest audiobook retailer that there is. Apple might be up there with them, but, it's all pretty close. But the good thing is with ACX, you can do an exclusive distribution arrangement, which basically means that you can't sell it on your own, but they'll automatically list it through Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. So right off the bat, you've got the three biggest markets with audiobooks. Now, if you don't like the exclusivity part, you don't have to opt in for that. And then likewise, if you're like me, if you're an indie author and you don't just walk around with, $100 bills falling out of your ass every few seconds, you can actually submit an audition script, and then a description of the narrator. If you're looking for a man, for a woman, an age range, any type of accent, certain types of delivery, depending on the material. But once you get that done, you can actually set it as a royalty share, which basically, say you make $10 for every audiobook that you sell, $5 goes to you, $5 goes to the narrator. So that way, if the narrator, obviously if they're looking at that type of project, then they're okay with a royalty share setup. As long as you are, then that's a way that you can get in without having to shell out anything overhead. You're not having to pay narrator fees. You're not having to pay flat out of pocket. Of course, if you've got the means to do it, you can track down a narrator or just put up the audition, and then just do the rate, whatever rate the narrator charges. You can do it that way. Or if you've already got, recorded files for all your chapters and everything, then you can verify its content against their guidelines, and you can submit that for review to them without having to go through the process of auditioning a narrator or doing anything like that. Doing the audiobook for Bermuda was the first experience I had with it. Luckily, I had a narrator who was experienced. He was very prompt in getting everything done. We had discussed a time frame, and he was right on having everything done. When I got to review the end product, there were just a couple of small things, and I touched base with him and within a day he was on having the stuff taken care of and re-uploaded. A gentleman by the name of Fred Greenspan. So, if you've heard the Bermuda audiobook, or if you're thinking about it, personally, I think he did a phenomenal job. And with me, and it's tough because when you create something, especially as a writer, and especially when, everything is really visual to me. I'm thinking of everything, I'm imagining it as I'm writing it. And when I first heard his audition, it did completely mesh with what I had in mind. But that's a part of also why I went with him, because I was thinking, well, I've got this in mind a certain way, and honestly, I'm probably not going to find everything 100% that no matter what. Even if I did it myself, probably still wouldn't be 100% of that. And I started thinking about it. I was like, well, he's definitely he's investing in himself into the performance, which is first and foremost, because you don't ever want to deal with somebody that you think is half-assing it. Which obviously I don't believe that he was. I'm satisfied with the way that it came out. I would definitely recommend acx.com to anybody. Again, not a paid endorsement. I'm not getting any money or preferential treatment. Just a little advice to anybody that's out there that's wondering about, putting out an audiobook, of an existing work that they've got. I'm also doing auditions. I've received a few that I've been sorting through for the horror anthology. And for those keeping score at home, I just said that for the first time in this podcast series. I got it right the first time. That's the first time that's happened. So mark your calendars on that. April 30th, that happened. But I'm working on getting the horror anthology done as an audiobook. I would do it myself, but, through the course of a day, trying to get stuff written and things like that, even though it's a novella, I just don't really have the time to get it done the way that I would like to. And it'd be the same as me writing a manuscript. I'm going to sit here and agonize over the smallest things for about 5 years, and it's never going to get done. And nobody's ever going to see me, and my son's going to be like, where the hell is my dad at? He's been gone for 5 years. It's just going to turn into a mountain of shit. So I'm putting it out there for the professional narrators, to try out, to take a look at the audition script, see if they like the material, if it's something they're interested in, and then, just move it along from that point. I'll let them do what they're good at, and I'll do what I at least think that I'm somewhat good at, which is just sticking to the writing and getting all that taken care of. So, just two pieces of advice from somebody that's gone down those roads before. If you're a writer, no matter what age, no matter what experience level, if you're publishing ebooks, consider draft to digital if you have not already. Gives you access to multiple online storefronts through one dashboard, a single upload of the document file. You're not having to check up on however many different sites that you sell through. And then if you want to produce an audiobook for any works that you've got, visit acx.com. They work, like I said, they'll upload it through Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. So the three biggest markets for audiobooks you'll be set up on. And it can be done in such a way that you're not paying anything up front, that it can just be drawn directly to the narrator, their share of the royalties. So if you want an audiobook done, if you've really got something written and you really, really want to have it in audiobook form, but you don't like your voice, you don't think that you can do it, you've tried and you've had problems with it, or, you just legitimately, like I said, you just might not have the time. Check out ACX. You've got nothing to lose except a little bit of time. But I will say that it was a kick for me, the first, hearing somebody that I don't know read stuff that I've written. It was just a kick. Not an ego trip type of thing, but it's just like, wow, so that's what this crazy shit that I write sounds like when somebody else says it out loud. Okay. So it's definitely an interesting thing to keep in mind. Moving along from that, um, one thing I've pretty much abstained from discussing by and large, both here and on social media, is politics, and that's by and large because both sides have a tendency to piss me off. I don't like hypocrisy. I don't like blatant lies. And I really am not a fan of the idea of a career politician. I just don't. I don't trust that. And what I'm about to get into, it really only grazes the outer edges of politics. But it encompasses something that's fascinated me for a very long time. And, there's a big push worldwide to cut down on carbon emissions. And regardless of what your thoughts are on that, on any of this other stuff, it's something that, a lot of people are giving a lot of serious thought and a lot of serious discussion to. People are always looking at renewables like wind and solar. Unfortunately, those do have their own drawbacks. One of the big things that's getting pushed in lieu of all of that is getting back to more of a focus on nuclear power. Now, on its face, that argument makes sense in the fact that, a properly run nuclear power plant, does not emit much in the way of carbon into the atmosphere. Now, the process of mining everything and getting them built is a different story. But the operation of the plant itself is not churning out smoke. It's not churning out what we typically think of when we think of plants and factories pumping out pollution and black smoke and stuff like that. So there has been more of a focus on that, and there are people that of course are opposed to that idea, and it's a really nuanced subject to get into. If for anybody that's listening that's not really familiar with how a nuclear power plant works, I'm going to boil it down. And of course, I'm no expert. I'm not a nuclear physicist. But it's something that's held my interest for some time. So I'm going to give you even below a layman's explanation. But it basically just uses a controlled, quote unquote, nuclear reaction to superheat water. The steam that it turns into is used to turn a turbine, which generates electricity. So at the end of the day, it's just, it comes down to boiling water, produce steam, use that steam to generate electricity. Seems simple enough. And honestly, it's in a perfect world where all the nuclear plants are very well designed and thought out, which, even the older ones that are out now had backup systems to backup systems. But you follow that level of detail in the planning stages with construction and have them operated by well-trained professionals. In an ideal world, that would be where it ended. You could submit a license, have it get approved if it did, begin construction, get everything up and running, and then you wouldn't have to think about it. Oh, they're just over there boiling water. Nothing to worry about. They're making electricity by turning water into steam. No big deal. Even in a best case scenario where everything consistently goes right, there's no machine error, there's no human error. The big question remains of what you do with the waste. Once the fuel rods are exhausted enough that they can no longer adequately be a part of creating that chain reaction, they're stored. Most plants, they're stored in cooling pools. But then what happens when those become overrun or where it's time to move them out? There had been discussion going back at least a couple of decades about turning Yucca Mountain into a repository for spent nuclear fuel, and that hasn't materialized. And I mean, honestly, it being opposed by the people that live, in that area, I can't blame them, because this, it's not the same as having a nuclear bomb go off, but you're talking about stuff, some of which has an incredibly long half-life, and in such quantities that the radiation would be, could be lethal to countless people over who knows how large of an area. It depends on the amount of the material, and depends on which way the wind's blowing. It could cause all sorts of problems. So I understand that. The bottom line, though, becomes, what do we do with that spent fuel? Now, there are people out there that are light years beyond me, not only in standard intelligence, but in this nuclear portion of it. And maybe they're working on ways that some of that could even be recycled or reused somehow. I don't know. It's not my forte. It's not my field. I'm just an interested onlooker. I'm standing on the sidelines, not going to tell anybody how to do their job, because I don't know. Just kind of musing on everything. That's the biggest, the biggest problem in a world where everything goes 100% according to plan. Now, unfortunately, as we all know, life doesn't work that way. In this country, just over 40 years now, as a matter of fact, I believe the 40th anniversary just passed within the last week or so, was the partial meltdown at 3 Mile Island. Of course, 3 Mile Island is a small island located in the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. I've actually been past the plant. I've got family in the southern part of Pennsylvania, and have been up to Harrisburg and Hershey numerous times. And when you can see the cooling towers, I haven't really been up close to it. But I've seen it, and it fascinated me because I knew a little bit at the time about what had happened there. And, of course, shoot me a comment if I'm wrong, but my overall understanding of what happened there was, a faulty valve. At the end of the day, a faulty valve is what started everything. I'm not going to say an unnecessary part, but a small and relatively inexpensive part of the cooling system failed, and the reactor, the plant on its own, started to do what needed to be done, but it was human intervention that exacerbated the situation. And of course, once again, that's not me pointing the finger at anybody, because it's one thing to know, okay, well, in this type of situation, the plant is going to run itself. It's going to correct what needs to be corrected so that the whole thing doesn't blow up. That's one thing to know that. But if you're a thinking human being in the control room of a nuclear power plant, and you have got alarms blaring all around you, lights flashing and things like that, your first instinct is not going to be just to sit back, kick your feet up on a desk, and drink some coffee. You're going to be like, what the fuck is going on? This is bad. What do we need to do? Unfortunately, their reaction was the wrong reaction. They thought the reactor was going solid, which is a term for when there's too much cooling water, and it basically chokes off the entire process. So to combat that, they cut off the flow of water with the cooling system, and began to expose the core. Again, the core is made up of uranium rods and then control rods, which are basically inserted when you need to slow and stop the reaction. If the uranium rods are left to their own device without any way of cooling, they will superheat, they'll begin to melt, hence the term meltdown. All sorts of bad shit can happen, not just radiation. You can have a full blown meltdown. Some of you might be familiar with the term the China syndrome. If not, maybe you've heard of the movie. But that phrase was originally coined because, hypothetically, should a nuclear reactor core melt down and go through the concrete and the floor of the reactor building and through everything else, it would go into the ground, fracturing the ground until it hit a water table somewhere. In which case, steam would go out in all directions, could pop up in driveways, down the street, in fields, and there would just be plumes of radioactive radioactive steam just shooting up like geysers, like Old Faithful coming out of the ground. And then when you factor in that 3 Mile Island sits in the middle of a river that serves a pretty fair portion of the state of Pennsylvania, you can imagine what might have happened had something like that come to pass. So it was something that went on for days. It wasn't just like a one and done thing and it's okay, well, this is what happened, we got it taken care of. No. It went on and on. There was so much confusion that President Carter actually sent a high-ranking member of the NRC to oversee, basically at first to get in there and give his on-site assessment to what was happening, so that information could be relayed to Pennsylvania's governor, back to President Carter, so there was no taint from the power company that owned the plant, because up to that point, the spokesperson they had, which was from the power company, was kind of combative, kind of defensive, and it was not a good look. Not a good look for anybody, especially when you've got reporters and civilians that are wondering, is this plant that we were told was safe? Is it about to explode? Are we going to die? And people were learning with radiation there, it's not, you don't just see some mystical green cloud floating toward you and you're like, oh shit, get in the car, we've got to get the fuck out of here. If it's strong enough, a lot of people report, like a metallic taste, and you can kind of smell it a little bit. But I mean, honestly, if you're not paying attention for it, you would probably never notice. And it goes through your body, it goes through your cells and your bones and everything. It can cause cancer, it can cause mutations in DNA. Not even to mention when you get into radiation sickness, when you're talking about vomiting, internal organs cooking, radiation burns where your skin's basically burning from the inside. It's not a pretty sight. It's not something that anybody wants to think about. And for the people in, Middletown is the town, I believe, where the plant is located, and there were towns directly around it where all these people were, they were kind of hanging in the wind for the better part of a week, wondering what the hell is going on, what's about to happen. And it's, according to a lot of people after the fact, the plant was, the reactor and its self-preservation systems were well on the way to making sure that what almost happened didn't happen, and that the human intervention is what caused it to get to the point that it did. The bottom line is it happened. 40 years, it's longer than I've been on the earth, but at the same time, that's really, when you look at the technology and stuff like that era moving through, it wasn't that far back. It's not like it was in its complete infancy and something like this happened. But that was in, I believe, April of 79. A few years later, they actually were able to send a robotic camera into the reactor to get a look, and they saw that indeed there had been a partial meltdown. So it could have been infinitely worse. than what actually happened. I mean, they still, nobody really seems to know for sure exactly how much radiation escaped, where exactly it went, or what the long term side effects were. There are quote unquote official studies that haven't linked any deaths to it at any point. But then again, there's a lot of people that question those statistics. And I mean, the sad thing is, having it been 40 years down the road now, we're probably not ever going to know the true repercussions of that. But thankfully or not, depending on how you want to look at it, that's the worst it's gotten for us here in the United States. 7 years after that, there was an accident that was far worse and had far larger implications for a greater area. And that, of course, was the VI Lenin power station, better known to most as the Chernobyl power station. It was in the spring of 1986. They were running a test, basically a low power test to try and keep the reactor and the turbine running while they waited for emergency generators to kick on. Things started to get out of control. And with a nuclear reaction, it does not take, when you're talking about a chain reaction of that type, it doesn't take long for things to start to get sideways. And it seems that one of the control room operators hit a master control to drop all the control rods, which I believe in that reactor were graphite rods, which basically slow down the nuclear reaction until it can be brought to a stop. The problem is those particular types of rods, when they first touch the water, can generate a small surge in power. And from that point, the reactor basically exploded. And one thing to note is like 3 Mile Island, and then all the other nuclear plants in the United States. You have control rooms, and then you've got the reactor rooms, and typically the reactors are in containment buildings. There's concrete, very thick concrete, to help prevent the escape of radiation, things like that. So generally they're pretty secure. The Chernobyl plant, not so much. I don't know the specifics of exactly how the outer building was built, but I mean, you can do a search on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't do it yet, or you can open a new tab. But you can look up the aftermath, and it is absolutely, it's mind blowing what that reactor building looked like afterwards. But tons of, I mean, it blew the concrete lid off of the reactor building. I mean, it just flipped it like you or me flipping a quarter on our thumb. Untold. I mean, who knows how much radiation escaped immediately. And of course, that time the Soviet Union, they were tight-lipped. They didn't like to tell a lot, especially when it was such a monumental fuck up as what happened at Chernobyl. In Sweden, they had employees arriving for work at a nuclear plant there that were testing at much higher levels of radiation. Nothing lethal at that point, but much higher than normal. And they looked at weather reports and they looked at things like that, and they said, well, it looks like those Soviets, they blew something up. Something over there is fucked, and it's coming this way. And eventually, some of the state-run news came out and said so much as that there was an incident, but things were under control, things were fine, which was of course complete bullshit, a complete snow job. They did end up evacuating the city of Pripyat, which was next to the facility. It was basically a city built to house all the people that worked at the plant, their families. But unfortunately, unlike what happened at 3 Mile Island, a lot of people died. More than we will probably ever know the absolute number of, just for the simple fact that you had the workers that were there, any of them that died immediately because of the explosion and that huge surge of radiation, those that died in the days and weeks after because of their exposure, and radiation sickness taking its toll on them. People down the road that developed all types of be it thyroid cancers or cancers in other parts of their bodies. And then you had the men that came to be known as the liquidators. If anybody's ever seen footage of the aftermath at Chernobyl, they've seen the men in the lead lined aprons with the black hoods and the gas masks that were shoveling out debris, trying to take care of the situation to make sure it didn't get worse. And what they were wearing was not, when you're talking about that level of radiation and the amount of time that they were exposed to it, how many of those men died, and the worst thing to me to think about is how many of them went in there or were sent in there not knowing exactly how dangerous it was. Did they know that there was a very, very high probability that they were being marched into their deaths? And I'm not saying that they would not have gone otherwise, but it's one thing to send somebody into a situation like that blindly without them knowing, as opposed to somebody being told, hey, it is imperative that we handle this, but there is a very good chance that you're not gonna survive, and then letting them decide, I don't care, I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna do this. There's a big difference. Not saying an accusation, just kind of makes me, it's the kind of thing that I think about. If all of them knew what they were getting into. They had helicopters flying in sand, helicopters flying in lead, getting enormous doses of radiation, because, there are overhead shots where you could still see, it almost looks like the cherry of a cigarette under a pile of sticks, where the reactor was still red hot, and there was just radiation spewing straight up into the air. And at such rates that, it would not take long to take its toll on your body. And then, of course, they built a containment building outside of it, which was done hastily to try and, to put up a barrier between that damaged reactor and the rest of the environment. And there's since been a movable, much more well-designed piece built for it to be more of a long-term solution. But a terrible situation. I wasn't in the control room, so I couldn't tell you exactly what led things to happen without it being complete speculation. But it just something shitty, and it shows you the absolute worst that can happen with a situation like that. And then, of course, 8 years ago, I don't know what it is about the springtime and these nuclear accidents. It just makes me a little antsy for summer to get here now. But and what was it, March 2011, after the Japanese earthquake, the tsunami, you had the incident at Fukushima where basically every reactor there got raked over the coals and just completely fucking... honestly, I don't know what amount of complete detail we'll get on that anytime soon, because you look at the way that plant was built right at the edge of the ocean. And yes, they had a seawall built, and when that tsunami came through, it didn't give not nary a fuck. It just knocked out the emergency generators, so they could not keep the reactors cool. It's one of those things, you cannot fault a country like Japan for wanting to put their technical expertise to use, wanting to try to embrace nuclear power. But it's one thing when you've got that much nuclear material in a reactor, the stored fuel waste rods, and you've got an area that's prone to earthquakes, that's prone to tsunamis. Just to the layman outsider, it does not look like the spot that I would choose to build 4 nuclear reactors. But again, I'm not here to blame. I'm just trying to look at the bigger picture, because there are people that want to make a push. After the Fukushima incident, there were countries that are like, fuck nuclear power. We're done with the shit. Fire up a coal plant, do this, do that. We're done with nuclear, because it's just, we can't. So it's a really, I really admire the technology. It's, like, it is a fancy way to boil water, but you think about the work and the thought that went into every theory around getting that to work, all the test reactors they've had over the years. I can respect the thought, I can respect the science, but it's just one of those things where, like I said at the beginning of this, even in the absolute best situation, you've still got to contend with a large amount of nuclear waste, and it's going to be around for a long time. And in the worst situation, the worst we've seen right now, it's still killed a lot of people. It's made areas uninhabitable, and even Chernobyl was only 33 years ago. Fukushima was 8. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be outside of that immediate area. So it's just food for thought, and that's not meant to try and scare somebody out of ever considering nuclear power. It's just, if you're going to make an argument for something, you need to know the pros and the cons. And I know that's not a very in-depth list, but it's just, an overview of things that have to be thought about. So, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on nuclear power? Have you gotten into a discussion with a friend or a family member or anybody else? Think about what kind of, what kind of pushback there is. Maybe you're on one side of the fence or the other. Tell me your thoughts on it, why you believe it the way that you do. Because stuff like this, you've got to have a discussion. This is not a dictatorship. We don't get, there's not one person that gets to tell us what's going to happen. We need to discuss things. Even things that are ugly and nasty need to be discussed, need to be at least thought about. And this is something where, this country uses a hell of a lot of electricity. And, something's going to be done at some point. We just have to decide, what side of the fence you come down on in terms of that. The last thing, at least I think the last thing, last topic I want to get into is a story that broke actually while we were at the beach last week. And that is the the I-70 crash outside of Denver that happened Thursday of last week, that left 4 people dead. And if you've seen any of the video of it, it was terrifying. The thought of an out-of-control truck plowing into a group of cars like that, it almost seems like a miracle that the amount of casualties wasn't higher than what it was. Of course, I'm thankful that it wasn't. And, my heart aches for the families of those that lost their loved ones in this situation. I took extra note of this accident because I've got family in Colorado Springs, in Denver, in different areas out there. One of which is my aunt, who was actually at the beach with us. When we saw the breaking story on this. And of course, there'd been a lot of speculation about what could have happened. But what caught my eye this morning is a news story from the denverchannel.com. And the headline states that the company that the truck driver that caused the accident works for has got past federal violations for brakes as well as the English proficiency of their drivers. So the first part of that, obviously, with the brakes, is the fact that it's not something that can be taken lightly, because trucking is a huge part of this nation's economy, getting goods moved around. And if you've got a company, and I don't know anybody that works there, I don't know any of the ownership, but when you've got a company, and granted, this is a small company, it says that they employ 5 drivers and 5 trucks. So it's not a huge company, but if they have flaunted regulations regarding safety in the past, I think this is going to be the end of them right here, because you can't, even if you only run 1 truck, if you don't take the time to make sure that the vehicles that you're putting on the road, the trailers that are being utilized, and I know depending on how your setup is, you might be hauling trailers that belong to a third party. I understand that portion, but at least from the truck standpoint, you've got to make sure that things are up to snuff. Now, this particular stretch of I-70, I am not familiar with. However, the article does say that over the past 2 years, the company that employed this truck driver were hit with 30 safety violations, including those for brake issues and drivers having a weak grasp of English. Now, some people might be saying, well, what the hell does that have to do with it? Well, if you're coming up into a major populated area, and depending on the type of road and where it's at and what kind of grade that it is, there might be signs that indicate specific things directed at truck drivers. And if the driver doesn't notice those, or is not sure exactly what those signs are telling him, they're not going to be able to follow what's on that sign. That's not saying that that's the driver's fault, but the company shouldn't be putting people in a situation where they're being set up to fail. And that goes for any country. If you're in Brazil and you can't read Portuguese, and there's a sign on the road in Portuguese that tells you better check your damn brakes, there's a brake check right here, anything that's safety related regarding that, and you can't read it, you're going to have a bad time. You're not going to be set up to do a good job. And then with the brake part, who the hell knows what the rationale is behind not taking care of what you're supposed to take care of. Now, was the driver being reckless? We don't really know yet. There's been some video that's come out that shows moments before the truck got there, and it was moving at a pretty fair clip, especially when we consider that there were so many vehicles that were stationary at the time. But had he been speeding prior? Had the brakes already failed? Because it seems a little hard to imagine that if you know that your brakes have failed and you see what's coming up, that you're going to go straight into. And granted, I don't have his point of view, what he saw, but you would think that if you were being completely attentive, you wouldn't go straight for a cluster of stationary vehicles. Now, of course, you're in a situation where if the brakes had already been found out to have failed, you're talking about heart rate going through the ceiling, pissing your pants, not knowing what the hell you're going to do. It's a shit situation. And the fact that this company has averaged 15 safety violations a year over the last 2 years doesn't look good on them. Doesn't look good at all. And unfortunately, we've got 4 people that are, they didn't get to come home that night. Their life was cut off right at that point. And, that's the kind of shit that pisses me off if it comes back that this was another situation where this company was lax on the rules. You know, a regular accident where nobody gets hurt is one thing, but when you're talking about people losing their lives because of laziness or just being fucking cheap, that's the kind of shit that we cannot abide by. And when I say we, I just mean people. I don't give a shit what party that you're affiliated with. I don't give a shit what any of your beliefs are. This is the kind of thing that cannot be tolerated. If people flaunt the rules, they've got to be held accountable. You don't have a right to own a business. If you own a business and you keep fucking up and people die, guess what? That's it for you. That's not just giving somebody food poisoning. That's not selling, a hamburger made from beef that maybe it might have gone out yesterday, but we'll kind of see. Not that you should be doing that shit. If anybody's listening to me thinking about doing that, don't fucking do that. But when you're talking about putting a several ton projectile filled with diesel fuel on a crowded interstate and the brakes aren't working properly, what the fuck are you doing? That's not something that you can excuse. You know, I want to be hesitant to come out and start swinging the blame stick around, but 30 violations over 2 years, including brake violations, and then you have an issue where a truck looks like it was a runaway, sped into a group of barely moving vehicles and caused this catastrophe. It's kind of hard to see it any other way. I mean, there's not... I don't see a whole lot of gray area with this right now. You know, beforehand it was one thing. Who knows what might have happened? But then you see that the company that owned the truck has just been, piss in the wind when it comes to being safe. Definitely not a good look for them to be in at all. And I've got friends and family that drive and have driven, big trucks and things like that. And in my experience, I've run into some real stupid fucking dipshits that drive trucks. They don't seem to pay attention to shit. And they are worse than people in a station wagon or in a hatchback, because their vehicle can do a shitload of legitimate damage. Having said that, usually when I see a big truck on the road, in my personal experience, I know it's anecdotal, so it doesn't mean shit in the grand scheme of things. Typically, they're some of the more cautious drivers. If they see a slowdown, they're going to slow down as far ahead as they can because they know that they're pulling a lot of weight and they need room to stop. Most of the ones that I've interacted with on the road don't just blindly change lanes. They try to play by the rules because they know that their life is at stake. Theirs and, just about everybody else around them. In a situation like this, I mean, we don't know what part exactly the driver played at this point, but it's looking more and more like the company he worked for didn't give a shit, didn't care. I don't know how severe these previous 30 infractions were. Obviously, they weren't punished enough, depending upon what the infractions were. I can promise you their asshole's going to be hurt after this one. There's no way around it. I mean, to put your employee and everybody on that road, because this could have happened. I mean, granted, there were other situations going on in the area that caused the traffic to slow down, but I mean, you think about all the other places this truck could have gone through where something like this could have happened. Maybe it would have been worse. Maybe it would have been a minor incident in another spot. Doesn't make a difference. You don't put a vehicle on the road like that if it's not roadworthy. And I've got a feeling their maintenance records are already getting checked. They're already being gone over with a fine-tooth comb. And, if something's missing, if something doesn't pass the sniff test, they are fucked. And they should be. If I ran a company like that and something like this happened on my watch, I would expect the full brunt of everything to come down on my head. And that's the way that it is. That's why I do this. That's why I write. Because the damage that I can do is pretty minimal compared to a lot of things. So it's just, it's tragic because, had things been done properly, this would not have happened. And I know that bad shit, tragic shit happens all day, everywhere, all over the globe. That doesn't mean that you can't give a shit about something like this. And I absolutely despise when people try to, oh yeah, but what about the so-and-so and the blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's bad. This is also bad. They don't wash each other out. You can think about more than one thing at a time. Granted, some of the people that say shit like that probably are incapable of thinking of one thing without it having to push something out the other side of their fucking brain. But that's a discussion for another day. As for this day, in sunny Greenville, North Carolina, I thank you guys for joining me again, as I always do. I hope the rambling didn't affect you too much in a negative way. And as you can tell, I'm getting to the point more where I'm going to try and branch out on different things per episode and not try to pinpoint it on one small thing, which, I mean, it seems like common sense. If you're going to do a podcast and you want an episode to be more than 20 minutes, you're either going to have to run one thing into the ground or, you're going to have to talk about a few things. So bearing that in mind, like I said, over the next couple of weeks, keep an eye, if you're an Apple user, keep an eye on Apple Podcasts, because I'm going to try and get the first 3 episodes condensed into one so I can get that submitted there. I really have no idea how in the hell long this one is, so we'll find out soon enough. If you're watching, well, quote-unquote watching, on YouTube, leave a comment, your thoughts on anything we discussed, be it music, be it publishing or audiobooks, the whole thing with nuclear power, the crash in Colorado last Thursday, or, you got something that you would like to hear discussed here, shoot a comment. Same thing if you pull up on SoundCloud. There, okay, I can talk. Leave me a comment there. My email is jebbohn@gmail.com, so you can shoot me a line there if you can think of a topic that you want to hear discussed, your thoughts, things like that. The reminder, as always, if you swing by my website, which is jebbohn.net, you can sign up for my mailing list, get my every month or so email newsletter. But if you sign up now, you will get a free download for an ebook copy of my horror anthology novella titled Random Synapse Misfire. It's got three shortish stories, one of which is called The Night Ferry, which, interestingly enough, took place on one of the ferry routes that we took while we were at the beach. Thankfully, no fucked up shit happened to us on that journey. But, feel free to stop by there. Go back, check out the rest of the website. You can find the podcast there, my blog, online store. You want to buy any books, paperbacks, ebooks, any of that good stuff. You want to drop me a line and tell me I suck. You want to drop me a line and tell me that you want to catch a beer. I don't know how the hell you catch a beer. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about anymore. My throat's getting dry and my brain's starting to fall asleep. But feel free to check all that stuff out. Until next time, I will see you later. Have a great afternoon or evening or night, morning, whatever it is for you.